Kick it off, Tule. Thanks for making time to do this today, for sharing your insights with us. I'm really glad that you watched Amy Smith's
Yeah.
episode as well. And do you know Amy well, or did you just catch her
Yeah.
episode? Oh,
Amy and I
cool.
used to work together, so we collaborated on some
Oh,
events. So she worked with the Students Association, the BCIT Students Association. So when I saw Amy online, oh, I got definitely part that one because yeah, I just love Amy. So yeah, we worked
oh,
together.
that's very cool. And she spoke so highly of the Student Association. That really connects now. This space seems to be an everyone knows everyone kind of group. So that's really cool to hear. And I'm glad that we have you on here now to kind of share your stories because everyone says things in a slightly different way. And people seem to really like hearing, you know, your own take on things or someone else's take on things. So I always like to start by asking, what's your career journey been like? How did you kind of get to the point you're at today? And, are there any stops you made along the way that you can tell us about? Because I think people often think they're gonna graduate and do one thing.
Hmm.
As we've learned from the past few episodes, that's almost never the case. So what's your story been like, Tuli?
Yeah. Well, most of my, I guess, if you want to call it professional work experience has been in career development and career education. So I started out my career working for a company called Back in Motion. It's a rehab company, but there's also employment services as well. So, I worked for a program called Skilled Immigrants Program, where majority of my work was working with skilled professionals, newcomers, and helping them get back to their pre-landing occupations. So a lot of the clients that I worked with at that time were, either doctors or nurses and engineers and accountants. So their goal was to get back into securing work that's aligned with their previous profession and education. So I did that for quite some time. I think I was with Back in Motion for about 10 years, but minus 3 years of mat leave. So, I really enjoyed the work. I just, everyone that I meet always had, like you said, has such a unique story and they have a story to tell. And I'm curious why they decided to leave everything behind to come to Canada. So I always like to start off with that question with the clients I work with. And yeah, it was a really rewarding, really just really great experience. And then this position came along, and one of my colleagues says, "Julie, come work with me at the BCITSA." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, tell me about this role." And so I was actually on mat leave at the time, and
Oh,
just kind of decided I was thinking of extending it for a year and a half and just taking more time, but after just kind of learning about the role and the opportunity, I decided to go for it. And I've been here with the Students Association for about 5.5 years now. So I've been working mainly with students in higher education, and it's been a really wonderful experience. My role right now is a career specialist with the focus on School of Business and Media programs. So I have a fairly large portfolio, but it's been really great learning and meeting students from different program areas within business and media.
that's so cool to hear that you've been in this space for long enough that you've started to see different people from different backgrounds
Mm.
go through this transition,
Yes.
because I think you start to see the similarities, right? Like, no matter what your background is, you come to this sort of crossroads where it's, all right, now you're about to embark on something new and you have to think a bit about, whether you're new to the country or entering the workforce for the first time,
Mm.
where do you want to go next?
Yes.
Is that a question you kind of talk about through the Students Association work you do now?
Yeah, well, I find that the students I work with at BCIT, whether they're students or recent graduates or alumni, they most of them are pretty career focused. They know exactly what they want to pursue. It's kind of similar to the skilled immigrants that I work with. So we kind of have a pretty good focus on what they want to land. But there are students out there that, they finished either a business program or a BBA or business administration, and they're not really quite sure. So I do a little bit of the career planning and exploration as well. And it's just what I find, whether it's working with clients like newcomers or with students, it is a process, career planning, career development, kind of understanding where you want to go, what are your goals. It is a process. It's kind of, an uncovering of understanding who you are, where you want to be, what are your values, what are your strengths, and then kind of, and then having steps, putting together steps and how to get there. So like I said, everyone that I've worked with, they're they have they have a goal, they have a focus, and your role is to kind of help them get there, and kind of help them discover what are their strengths, and how they can
Yeah.
best utilize their skills.
Yeah, and that's an interesting group to be working with because a lot of the conversations I've had have been around, you know, a demographic that's doing a lot of career exploration. But that's interesting that the folks you work with are skilled newcomers who kind of know the field they want to go into, or students who have a sense of what they want to do. Um, I actually, the first thing I want to ask about is the newcomers, because I know that for them, there might be a bit of time between when they land and when they can actually start doing the work they were doing before coming to Canada.
Yes.
And in that transition, um, what are some of the steps that they're taking to get back to the work they know? Like, are they having to work other jobs in between or takes, additional courses? What sort of happens in that transition for
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yes, there's lots that happens. I mean, aside from kind of settling in and just kind of getting their
that's
bearings in Canada, I will say that the clients that I work with have a PR, so that is kind of the eligibility to be in the Skills Connect program or the Career Paths program. So
oh,
a
I
lot
see.
of times, they know where they want to go, but it's kind of our work is to kind of provide them with that continuous support. And a lot of them just I would say, they're professionals, but they don't know how things work in Canada, in BC. What is kind of the landscape, and how should what are some of those nuances with Canadian workplace practice? So we do a lot of that work. But to answer your question about what happens in between, yes, we do see a lot of clients that I work with, get obtain jobs that are not aligned with their background. But our goal is to see what are your skills, what are your experiences, what kind of work can we do that's somewhat related to what you were doing before. So, for example, if I work with a professional engineer, it might be something within construction, it might be something within an estimator position, or working on the field, or something along the lines that helps them get within that industry.
That is super interesting because whenever I think of survival jobs, I always sort of think of them completely outside of the industry. But I think it's probably going to be encouraging for newcomers, and skilled immigrants who might be watching this episode to think about getting, a job that's in their field, even though it's not the position they would have held before. Because my background is in engineering, actually.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, what you just said makes a total sense. I think there's a dual benefit to if you're an engineer working in a construction role or a fabricator role,
Mhm.
because you actually get to know a different segment of the team. And
Yes.
that can be so valuable. So I think that's a really interesting idea, Tule.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, if people need to do what they need to do, if they need to find a job, a survival job, if you want to call it that, is completely unrelated. That, we understand, people need to make a living and need to make money
Yes.
for their family, but we also kind of want to encourage them to think about other opportunities that they can think about that utilizes some of those skills and experience, and just so that they can be more exposed to that industry as well, and just talk to people within the field, and understand what are the expectations, what are other roles that, you could consider. It might not be a professional engineer. Maybe that might not be feasible at this point, but what can I do right now? Or how can I work towards that? Where it's more of a coordinator, or, you know, like something within that line of work.
Yeah, and that's helpful to know as well that that's part of the plan, really, is okay, there's going to be things that have to be put in place before you can resume that type of work, but that having jobs in between is not like um you're not going to end up doing that, but it's sort
Mhm.
of a necessary step along the way. I think that people can put a lot of pressure on themselves sometimes and end up working in jobs like that and feel like they're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I often have gotten that, where like I remember I worked with a internationally trained physician, and he was actually working as a taxi driver at that time. And
Yeah.
as I need to support my family, and I'm like, yeah, I totally understand that. And he was working towards studying for the exams. to get his licensure, and that is a process in itself, right? But I asked him, well, what else can you do to help you kind of tap into, the medical field, and we encourage them to do the networking piece, and a lot of skilled immigrants aren't comfortable with that. I think a lot of people maybe just aren't comfortable with networking in general. So just providing some of those tools in how to break into the field, maybe it could be a research position that you can consider in the interim, or at least talk to people within that area that you can, or volunteer so that you're in the medical field or in the hospital, so that you're still somewhat in touch with what you were doing before, but in a different level or different scale. So yeah, you do see that, but it's about just helping them kind of get through those steps, and what are some measurable, attainable goals that we can meet in each step of the way. And with these clients that I work with, it was over a 1.5 year span. So it wasn't just like a one-time thing. It was we worked with them for up to 18 months to help them reach their short-term and long-term goals.
Yeah, and I like that that's what you call them, short-term goals, like driving a taxi, even though you're trained as a physician, is a win. Like
Mhm.
you're providing for your family, and that's an accomplishment to have that in place. And I think it's helpful to know a time frame, like, it can take a year, it can take a year and a half. And I can completely understand why people would get frustrated, in that time. But I think it's helpful to know that, it's not for your lack of trying. It's just sometimes that's how long the process takes.
Yeah. I
So
think
that's
for that group, it was more about just providing them with that support and just someone to keep them accountable, and just really encourage them along the way that you're definitely on the right step. These are the things that we can work on. These are the things that you can do within your control now to help you reach those milestones, right? So it's that encouragement. And I remember with some of the clients I work with, that's really what helped them the most, is having someone to talk to, bouncing off ideas, and just someone that they can trust, and just talk about what are my next steps.
I think career development for like professionals really serves so many different purposes in that sense. It's not just like, okay, help me prepare for these interview questions or help me make sure my resume matches. It is this whole other set of needs that a job seeker may come to you with. So it's an extremely important role. And I'm grateful that, people like you do this work, Tule, that, the people who've been on the podcast do this kind of work.
Mm.
Um, do you see the need for any additional resources kind of with this in mind? Are there things that um, you would recommend to other career development professionals to help them as they, try to solve or support some of these job seekers with other things that they might be coming to you with?
For me, I think what's important for me, does it, whether I'm working with skilled immigrants, newcomers, or students in higher education, it's really about connection. I think we're all human at the end of the day, and and they all have a need. And I think for me as a career development practitioner is understanding, what are your needs? What do you need? How can I best support you? How can I help you along the way? So it's more of a partnership. I'm not the professional trying to tell you what to do, or these are the steps you need to take to be successful. But what can I help you with right now? And I think when you ask me, Tuli, what are some career tips that you could share? And I was thinking about that, and I actually went back to some of the testimonials that students wrote, with the students that I
Oh,
work with, and what contributed to their success. Because I was trying to remind myself, what were some of those things besides the resume and cover letter and that pieces. Some of them said that it's really about helping them understand who they are, helping them understand what their strengths are. And I always told the students, and whoever I was working, know your worth, know what your strengths are. What do you do well? And if you don't know, that's okay, but let's kind of talk about it. Well, when was the last time you worked on something that you're really proud of? Let's kind of start with that. And it's those small wins. And then once you have a better understanding of yourself, that's where it starts with, because when you have that foundation, then you can be more empowered to do all the other job search activities or job search steps, like putting together your resume and cover letter, because it'll shine through and all those other pieces, right? So I think that's a really important piece, is just having a connection with who you're working with, and it's a partnership, and making them that realize what their value is and what their skills. And if you have that inherent intrinsic feeling within, then it just your confidence will shine through.
Oh, that's amazing to hear, testimonials like that, Tuli. That's thank you for sharing that and for sharing some of the students' successes with us too. I just find it's helpful when, if I was a student watching, things like this when I was in school, it would make me feel like, okay, it's possible. There are people out there who have figured this out. There are people out there offering help. So that's a really helpful reminder, that, yeah, these things can be done. And that, again, they just take some time. Getting to know yourself takes some time.
Yeah.
Um, but it's helpful to have someone kind of guide that discussion and ask you questions so that you do start to think a little bit more about, yeah, what do I enjoy and what would I like to do?
Yes.
So yeah, that's why I, am doing this podcast as well, in part is to encourage people to reach out to the services that your school provides or that are in your community, because then you get to have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is one of those things where, as a job seeker, that's what, it's to stay committed to that. And with the students that I work with, they work with me on several, like, several meetings. It's not just kind of a one and done thing, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
let's work on this piece. Okay, let's go away, work on that. Let's come back and let's talk. So it is kind of unlayering that onion, if you want to call it, to get to the core.
Yeah.
And then they become more confident as they're doing. I won't just tell you, go be confident. You just have to be confident. It's about, understanding what your value and what you're worth. And that sounds a little bit ambiguous, maybe to a job seeker, but as we start talking about what are some of those skills, their strengths, tell me a time you did something like that. And then they start to realize, and once they believe in themselves, then they're just more motivated and more encouraged to kind of follow through with some of the other steps, especially with networking, which is something that I know a lot of people, are a little shy, intimidated to do. So
Well, that's something I was going to ask you about, and I can already see why having, again, someone like you to talk to afterwards would help with something like networking, because now, regardless of how it goes, you're going to have a debrief conversation about it. But when it comes to networking, you know, what were some of the tips you have given to job seekers, mid-career professionals? How can you find, opportunities to volunteer or people who might be able to offer guidance, mentors? Do you have any tips on how to do that kind of thing?
yeah, and there's so many different ways you can network or build, kind of expand your network, right? And I think the first thing I tell students and people that I work with is, network. I acknowledge that networking is not an easy thing to do. I know it can be a very intimidating process for many, especially if you don't like to be in the spotlight. And I'm one of those people. I used to be so scared just to walk into a career fair because I don't know what to say, how to present myself, and whatnot. But just kind of going through my own learning and my own just kind of self-reflection, you realize that these are just people. And if you can't be nervous and curious at the same time. So to take the spotlight away from me, which is why I don't like to network, if you want to call that, I just ask a lot of questions. I'm just curious. I want to know more about you. How did you get started? What do you love about your job? Tell me about the work that you do. How did So I encourage students, to start with going through that networking process. Prepare some questions to ask, and just be curious, because one an executive coach once told me, you can't be curious and nervous at the same time, and that really resonated with me. So just doing some preparation around that. But there's also other things that you can do, like you can volunteer. I actually got my very first job through my volunteer work. I used to volunteer at a Vancouver crisis center, and I learned a lot of valuable skills in active listening, and that really carried me through in my professional work till today. So, find opportunities for skilled volunteering. There's a lot of websites out there that you can do that. With the BCIT Students Association, we also have a mentorship program for the students, and I actually coordinate that program. So we match students, mentee applicants with industry professionals, and we work together for a term together. There's so many opportunities that are offered through your school. You just have to find out what they are. And I know with our department, with the ESA, we have a lot of different kind of student development programs for our students. But also joining a club. I know Amy talked about joining a club or being a club exec. That's really going to help you build your skills. And if you're not confident, then just, I always tell people, you can develop your confidence just by doing, and it'll come a long way.
Yeah, those are, again, such practical tips, Tuli. And I like that when you kind of went through the questions you would ask at a networking event. None of your questions were, do you have any jobs?
No.
Um, and I think that's the part that stresses people out is they think they have to go in there and like, do you have a job? Are you like, but if you ask those other questions and get to know these other people,
Mm,
like you said, then you build relationships, then you hear interesting things, then job opportunities and that kind of stuff come up naturally. So I think that's just really interesting that your questions were more, what do you like about the job? What do you get to do? Um, those kind of questions, like you said, if you are genuinely curious, it kind of gets exciting to talk to people instead of nerve-wracking. So
mhm. It's a conversation, and like you said,
yeah,
it's relationship building, and most people see, well, I don't want to say most, but some people see networking as more of a transactional process, like, what can you do for me? Do you have a job for me? That's maybe some of the reasons why people go to networking events, but it's really about being of service. How can I be of service to you? How can I help you? And then, things kind of sometimes come full circle, right? So it's always
yeah.
the focus is on the other person, and learning with them and how you can help them, whether it's, touching back, or just it's about building mutually beneficial relationships. And I think that's kind of the heart of networking that I try to share in part with the students that I work with.
Yeah, and I just see those end up being the most mutually beneficial relationships. I'm thinking of a maybe more approachable word, but those are
Mhm.
maybe the most fun, the most you know, those relationships are the ones that end up being the strongest, I would say, because you end up just talking and finding common ground or not. But that's what those events are good for, is just meeting different people. And I think on the volunteer side of things, like you were talking about, it's again, you don't have to overwhelm yourself, right? You can volunteer once a month. Because when I think of volunteering, suddenly in the mix for someone who is pursuing like a physician certification and driving a taxi and now is thinking about also volunteering, it doesn't have to be a daily thing, right?
No, not at all. I used to volunteer like 4 hours a week when I was in school. So yeah, the beauty of volunteering, it's a lot more flexible, and you're learning a skill, and you're meeting new people, and you can hopefully get a good reference. But another thing I also like to tell students is, I guess because I'm focusing on students because I work at BCIT, is,
Yeah.
there find opportunities to create experiences for yourself. You don't wait for that to happen. I think that's what I learned through my volunteer, because at that time I was considering whether I want to volunteer at the crisis center. I don't know what kind of demographics I'll be working with, how it's going to affect me,
Yeah.
in terms of my mental health. But I said, you know what, I'm going to go for it. I want to do it. I want to see what it's like, to see whether I'm kind of cut out for this line of work. And from that experience, it helped me kind of motivated me to do other things. I'm like, if I want, because I've had such a rewarding experience here, I made that happen. So if I want to have other experiences, I just have to make that happen. So just finding opportunities to create those experiences for yourself is really important as well. So yeah, and and I also tell students that you don't necessarily have to find work related to your field, whether it's volunteering or even just jobs that you're kind of doing in the interim, while you're trying to reach your long-term goal. If there's a certain job that you want, because you will find ways to develop your skill sets, whether that's transferable skills or hard skills, technical skills, and in other types of work, and that's going to be just as valuable.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I thank you again for kind of just sharing the time frame there. 4 hours a week sounds so different than, doing daily volunteer work that might seem completely overwhelming. And thanks for sharing the story about the crisis center as well, because I know people who would be interested in doing that kind of work, maybe hold themselves back, but it's like you said, you kind of just have to try some of these things to really know,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll always learn something. So I think that's a very helpful reminder as well, Tuli, is that, yeah, you can just try and it doesn't have to necessarily be in your field. It can just be something you're interested in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But take that initiative. I know it could be scary, but do it anyways. Uh,
Yeah.
and like for my personal professional experience, I tend to volunteer, and if there's something that needs to be done, I'm like, okay, well, I'll do it. I don't know what it is that I'll be doing or how I'm going to do it, but I'll figure it out along the way. and then you learn yourself because you put yourself in that spot.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I hope people listening uh take that mentality and put it to kind of use in their own lives as well. Because I think there are a lot of people that want to do something and they just need someone to say that exactly what you said, Julie, just give it a try.
Yeah, just
And
do it anyway, even if you're scared.
yeah. Well, I know we're pretty much at the end of the time I asked you for today. So I just want to say thank you for sharing these insights and stories, and also just ask if there are any sort of final words of wisdom or tips that you would give to, either job seekers or other career development professionals that might be, going through their own learning as they become more and more effective at what they do.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, yeah, I think at the end of the day, with your career journey, I think at the end of the day, it just starts with yourself. Before even considering going through the steps of applying for jobs, know what you want. Know what are your goals. What are you looking for? What do you envision for yourself? And what are and knowing who you are, what's important to you, what are your values, what are your skills, what are your strengths, and if you know that about yourself, at least you're starting that process, then I think it'll just really empower you to um know it'll empower you to apply for those jobs, and that even if you don't meet all the qualifications, that what I think I can do this, and find opportunities to meet with people as much as you can, because every person, for me, every person I meet, I try to learn something from that person, right? There's always opportunities for learning, whoever you meet, with networking, with the job search, with the resume. It is a process and it takes time, but you'll definitely get there if you are disciplined and determined. So
Yeah, and it's funny. It just again makes me think that you can ask yourself those questions and not have an answer right away. But if you
yeah.
keep asking yourself, eventually you'll start to discover some of these things about yourself. And I just it's kind of clicked for me the way you explained it, Tuli, is sometimes I feel like you ask those questions of yourself with the expectation that, all right, well, what do you want? Well, a lot of people are like, well, I don't know. Well, what do you like? Oh, I'm not sure. But if you keep asking, eventually, I totally agree. You'll discover something.
Mhm. Yeah. And if you don't know, like you said, that's okay that you might not know what that is. It is, you're evolving as a person, as you go through your life stages, right? And, for me, it's always about talking to my colleagues, tapping into that resource, or with students, tapping into your career center, find a career specialist that you can speak to and follow up. And they're there to support you. And, it's really uncovering, what asking the right questions, and hey, when was the last course that you really enjoyed? What was it about that course? So the asking the right questions can also uncover some of those things that you might thought you didn't know. So I think it's about reaching out for help. If you don't know, then ask for support.
Well, that makes yeah, that gives us a lot to think about, Julian. I think it just goes back to what you're saying about being curious.
Mhm.
So thanks again for sharing these insights today, for spending some time with us. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your weekend coming up here. And
Yeah,
hopefully you'll join us again soon on a future episode.
that's awesome. Thank you, Imran, for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. And yeah, same to you. Have a great weekend. I think we're going to be enjoying some sunshine out in Vancouver. It's going to be 27 today, so I'm looking
Oh,
forward
wow. Very nice. Well,
to
enjoy
it.
that sunshine. I'm going to do the same here. It's getting brighter as well. So I will talk to you soon then, Julian. Thank you again for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Imran. Okay,
Have a good
bye.
one. Bye.